Hey, what is going on, everybody? And today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. A little bit of numbers, and this is comparing before and after the changes to OG Spider-Man and Miles as it pertains to the Web Warriors. Now, particularly, this is the base stat increases that they'll be getting next week for the patch and how significant this adjustment is for them. I spent a bit of time yesterday on Twitch compiling the data and making a spreadsheet comparing the before and after, and I think it's quite interesting to see these, so I'm going to be sharing this with you all. And I also want to compare their new stats with some of the recent rework characters and new releases to give us a better idea of where they stand compared to this. Without a doubt, there has been some significant increases, but I wanted to get at, exactly how much they've improved and what this means for their team. What we still need from other members, and whether or not these two in particularly look to be investable since they're older characters. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Okay, so here we are over on my new spreadsheet that I produced for this video here. So we're going to be starting off by talking about OG Spider-Man before we go on to talk about Miles. And I took a lot of the base stat increases from the video that was released the other day from Arnold from Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. And so you can see the increases of the base stats here. So 69% for health, 24% for damage, 700% for armor, 19% for focus, and 36% for resistance. Also, he did have a base speed increase from 116 to 122. Now, all of this stuff is in reference to level 85, gear tier 15, 7 yellow to start, and then that's when we add the red star stats in after, because that's how you kind of need to adjust the base stats. So for people who are unaware, base stats typically are in reference to non-red star stats, and then the red star stats bump everything up afterwards. So that's how we're going to go through the totals as we go along. Same with ISO. So ISOs bump the base stats. It doesn't bump like the stats with the red stars, if that makes sense. It's not multiplicative in that way. So we're going to go through this one by one, and hopefully it makes some sense. So here we have the old stats of what an OG Spider-Man would be. Level 85, gear 15, 7 yellow, 0 red with 25% Stark Tech. And it's pretty low, it's pretty bad, but I mean, this is obviously the 0 red adjustment, so obviously it's going to look poor. So we have 132,000 on the health, 16.9 thousand on the damage, 1400 on armor. It's really low. 5,880 for focus, 4,800 for resistance with a speed of 116. Now, with the adjustments that I mentioned here in this column, you can see the new improved stats for the base stats. So health is significantly improved, up to 223,000, 20,900, or basically 21,000 on the damage, and almost 10,000 armor. So this is a huge increase. And then once we look at the red stars and all that, it's pretty nice. So that's a crazy adjustment to armor. Spider-Man was like a wet paper bag. I guess he was supposed to be dodging a lot, and he's still going to be doing that. But now with the improved armor, at least if he gets hit, he's not going to get his ass kicked as quickly as he did before. So that's really, really good. Focus bumped to 7,000. Resistance to 6,500. Now, this is where we add in the red stars. So red stars accounts for 50% at 5 red. So that's what we're kind of aiming for, because I think that a 7 yellow, for these older characters, a 7 yellow, 5 red is a really good point to look at them, because they're very easily farmable, so it's quite easy to get them at a 7 yellow. Not only is Spider-Man OG in the Blitz right now, but both of them, Spider-Man OG and Miles, are both in the Blitz store. So very easily obtainable to 7-star, just like Gamora was when the Infinity Watch reworked. And so I would not necessarily recommend a 6 red or higher on these characters, because I tend to, reserve that for arena type characters. But I think 5 red is a reasonable point that you could actually bring them up. So that's why we're doing the calculations at 5 red. So this is how much, this is not the new total, this is how much it adds on. So all of this is just a 50% addition onto this new base stats. For ISOs, we did do ISO Blue 2. And in this case, it typically looks at Raider, because if you add in Striker, it adds more damage. I was mainly looking to do this to get the 14% stat adjustment from ISO Blue 2, but also the hit points that you get from that as well. So if you have a character up to ISO Blue 2, then that'll give you an additional 30% health on top of all of the existing stats as well, which gives you a grand total of 44% additional health for ISO Blue 2. So when you add in all these stats, and for the rest, it's only 14% additional stats for the ISOs, but that still adds quite a bit when you count 50% from Red Stars, 14% from ISO Blue 2. That gives you 64% increase on the base stats. So that's quite a bit. So when we look at the grand total, after all of that, we add this all up, and what do we get for Spider-Man OG? Well, we get 434,000 health, which is actually quite respectable. And when we check some of the other characters and what their stats are like at a very similar level, you'll see it's actually pretty decent. Damage is at 34.4 thousand, armor is at 16.1 thousand, which again is a huge whopping increase when we look at what he'll have from previous. 11.5 thousand basically on focus, and 10.75 thousand on the resistance. Now I want to kind of bring up the chart here for this is msf.gg. Really great resource. Now this particular page is OG Spider-Man. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and see if I can do this, and the dragging here, and I want to drag it on one half of my screen and then have this on the other. So we're going to move this over so we can look at them side by side. Now this is the total here for OG Spider-Man, and this is the old total for OG Spider-Man. So hopefully you guys can see this. I'll read it off though. But 257,000. Again, this is the 7 yellow, 5 red, blue ISO 2. So 257,000 health. The new total of 434,000 health. That's a pretty big increase for the exact same levels. 34,000 damage new versus old 27,749. Armor 20. This is the hugest improvement. 2,300 armor. 16,000 armor on the new one. That's quite insane. 11.5 thousand on the focus, 9,650 on the old focus, and then 10,750 on the resistance, and 7,900 on the old resistance. So it's quite a big improvement when it comes to OG Spider-Man on the new stats, particularly in the health field. But you know, even in the damage, this is a respectable increase, and the armor is really significant, because if you the spider characters kind of remind me of like Cloak, because you guys know that Cloak has an increased dodge chance as well, but when he gets hit sometimes it can really hurt. So now that Spider-Man OG has that increased armor, it will really help his survivability in case something bad does happen. So now I want to jump to Miles, and we're going to minimize it just for now. And this is Miles' old stats compared to Miles' new stats. Now I need to move this. Apparently that's... There we go. Okay, so we can see it here. So Miles got an increase of 60% health, 72% damage, 380% armor. Now he didn't need the armor as badly as OG Spider-Man. 18% focus, and 28% resistance. So this it's respectable, especially in the damage and the health department, but it wasn't as huge of a change as OG. So you can see some of the numbers here, the old numbers. These are, again, 7 yellow, 0 red to start, and then the new increases. But then when you add all of the red stars, again, it's the same formulas from the other tables. And the ISO Blue 2, which again is referencing largely Raider. I mean, because it's pretty standard, just gives you a normal standard increase. Striker just kind of plays with the damage numbers a little bit more. I would actually maybe consider recommending Striker for Miles because of his basic, but for the purposes of this video and for the purposes of the table, I'm not using Striker in this. So we get a grand total of 483,000, which is more health actually than OG Spider-Man over here. 34,366, basically the same. The same damage stat as OG, 14,500 armor, a little bit less armor, that's okay. 13,000 focus, that's where it's important because he does have higher focus than OG Spider-Man. He has more debuffs, I think, that you kind of need to land. You have the disrupt on the ultimate, things like that. And if you're clearing positive stats effects on the basic, I think that's pretty important too. His resistance is 12,400, and then that's a notable increase over OG. Now, when we compare this again and we... Oh, that's my game background. If we could actually just bring up the other page here, and we have Miles here. Put this on the side like I did last time here. Bring up this one, then we have them side by side. So this is really important. So hopefully you guys can see this, and then we'll scroll down. So it's a fair difference. Health, 483,000 versus health, there we go, try to line it up a little bit better. Health, 302,000. Now, I know this is my frame cuts off a little bit. Basically, the old damage was 20,000 versus the new damage of 34,000. That is quite significant. That is a huge increase over his old damage. Armor 3,800 versus the new armor of 14,500. That's a lot. Focus 11,000 compared to the new focus of 13,000. Resistance 9,700 versus 12,400. Now, what does this all mean? So let's bring up some of the older characters. Let's bring up Symbiote Spider-Man because I like to look at this difference. Now, in terms of the stats here, now we'll take Miles, for example. 440,000 health on Symbiote Spider-Man. Miles has 483,000. Exact same, you know, 7 yellow, 5 red, 2 blue. 32,000 damage. Miles has higher damage. 14,500 armor versus Symbiote Spider-Man's 15,300. Symbiote Spider-Man has a little bit more armor, but okay, we'll give him that one. Focus 10,673 versus a focus of 13,000. So again, you know, Miles has 2,400 more focus. That's pretty good. Resistance 6,700 versus 12,000. So he's almost got double, not quite, almost double the amount of resistance as Symbiote Spider-Man. Now let's look at OG. 434,000 hit points, about the same hit points. Damage, he's got OG has higher damage than Symbiote Spider-Man. He also has higher armor than Symbiote Spider-Man. He's got more focus than Symbiote Spider-Man and more resistance than Symbiote Spider-Man. So these base stat increases are quite good across the chart. Now let's look at a new character. So like Lady Deathstrike, I want to use this because she's a brawler. So I use the exact same thing, 7 yellow, 5 red, as a good way to like check these characters. So let's compare. Lady Deathstrike has higher health at 483,000 versus 434,000 for OG. She has a little bit higher damage, but, you know, as a brawler, heavy on the bleed damage, that's okay. 18,400 armor. Again, she's tech, so I don't know, kind of expected her to have she's cybernetic, right? So kind of expected her to have that little slightly higher armor. Focus 12,800 versus 11,500 for OG, and then resistance is lower than both of them as well. So I'm not gonna, you can see the numbers here if you're curious. You can pause it. This is the numbers for Miles versus Lady Deathstrike. And actually what's funny is that Miles has an exact identical number for health as Lady Deathstrike. And I think that's it. But what's interesting is Lady Deathstrike has a very similar numbers to the Wolverine rework. So that's the other character. So this is Wolverine's rework. I wanted to kind of share that as well. Identical health. 483,771 health. Exact same number. Well, how did they get to this number? I don't know. And that kind of makes me realize that my math is right. Because after doing this, I'm like, okay, I added all this. I must have been doing something right. Because I came up with the exact same number for both Lady Deathstrike and Wolverine. So either that's a scary coincidence or, you know, I did something right. So the damage numbers, very similar, actually. 35,500 for Wolverine versus 34,300 for Miles. The armor, Wolverine does have higher armor now. He has quite a bit, actually, and he can block and things like that, too. Focus and resistance, 9,500. They actually, these web warrior reworks have higher stats than the Wolverine rework, with the exception of armor, and he's a little bit higher on the damage. So what does this really tell you? Well, that is actually pretty good, and this will scale even better if you were one of those lucky people who actually landed a 6 or 7 red. You know how you always get that 6 red, 7 red for a character, but, you know, at the time that you get it, you're like, oh god, this is terrible. You know, like the people who may have pulled a 7 red Gamora before she got the rework. So now you actually have something decent that you can use if you have some good red stars for these characters. Are they worth the 5 red upgrade? I think they are, because these stats are pretty nice. Are they worth a 6 or a 7? Like I said, you know, I'm not a big fan of upgrading with gold promotion credits for characters that are not arena-type characters, but if you have a lot of gold promotion credits lying around, I would probably give it to OG Spider-Man over Miles personally. I think that his change is going to be much more significant than what Miles is. If you haven't seen the whole ability reworks, do check that out. Now, I don't have a video on that, unfortunately, but I believe we'll be seeing that in the blog post on Friday as well, if you haven't, or if you just want to wait for that. Some special notes, though. So, apparently, OG Spider-Man does get 5% more speed after the start of the battle. I think this is in reference to his passive being reworked. I also want to say that Ghost Spider, if you haven't checked out her kit, she does give Web Warriors plus 25% damage in raids only. So, you see the increase in damage here. Their stats are quite significant. Now, consider this increase in raids, you're going to get an additional 25% damage for both OGs, well, for the whole team. But this is going to go up even further. So this is going to bump it well over 40,000 for OG, and for both of them, they're actually pretty similar in terms of their damage stat numbers. So this is pretty good. Now, we'll have to see what this looks like in battle, but I'm quite impressed with the reworks that they do for these older characters. The base stat increases are, this is what they need. All of the reworks for old characters need to be about this level, because this puts them on par with some of the newer characters. It's, you know, not too far off of Lady Deathstrike, for example. So I think that's what we need at a bare minimum to keep these characters up on par with those new ones that are coming out, especially, you know, some of these really OP ones. We're not even going to talk about Eternals, and I don't expect them to be Eternal level strong, but this is kind of what we need at a bare minimum. So in the future, I hope they keep going on with things like this, especially when it comes to base stats on health, particularly, maybe armor as well. You know, I'm gonna be doing I might do a separate video about Scientist Supreme. I've been talking about Scientist Supreme off and on for some time as a tech answer for Doom Raid, but her base stats are absolutely horrible. If we ever got a MODOK release, I hope that she gets a base stat increase as well. But that's the end of this video. I hope that this was illuminating for you guys a little bit. I know it's a little bit mathy, but it's really interesting to see, I think, the old versions and the new versions, and how much increase this really means. When you see things like 60%, 69% health increase, what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, hopefully this made it a little bit clearer for you. So that's the end of this video, and if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And of course, until next time, stay safe and healthy. I'll see you all later. Boilon signing out.